Thanks, Mikhail. Good morning, everyone. So this story opens on a boat in the middle of the ocean with a raging storm in the near distance that's whipping up the waves and appears to be getting closer. And as the captain grips the wheel, bracing for these merciless winds, the question of the moment is, will the captain steer the boat, or will the boat steer the captain? Now, if you have been sailing or on a cruise lately, you know what rocky waves feel like, and this probably sounds like a dramatic scene. And I certainly hope you've never had to experience this physically, nor have ever been in a boat that looks like that. But when we consider that this is where many companies are today in regards to company values, this metaphor isn't so exaggerated. So in this unfolding drama, you, the executives, are the captain, guiding consumers through the world of your brand. And there are strong tailwinds urging you to take a stand on social, moral, political values. And these tailwinds are getting more intense and more pervasive. They come from consumers who are losing trust in the government, professional sports teams, the media, things that people have typically relied on to signal their values. And instead, they're putting this trust in companies. Today, 71% of consumers in the US have a clear sense of what they stand for. They say they have conviction in their own code of values. 55% look for brands that reflect their own personality rather than the latest style. And about 4 in 10 want to buy from a company that is closely associated with social, environmental, or political issues. These tailwinds, this urgency, is also coming from employees who are demanding that their employer stand for a particular values code, and now are coordinated and passionate enough to retaliate when the employer doesn't, like we've seen with Google and with other similar firms recently. This urgency is even coming from investors and the shareholders, like the CEO of BlackRock, as you all know, one of the world's largest financial firms, who has been imploring that companies demonstrate a commitment to the communities in which they operate and think about the world's future prosperity. So all these tailwinds are essentially urging companies and executives to take a stand on values. But in such open waters, it's very difficult to know whether you're staying on course, whether what you're saying about values and how you're saying it is leading you to solid ground or wayward into the storm. For example, consider the fact that when Chick-fil-A revealed its highly conservative values a few years ago, consumers sort of rose up in vehement response. Conservatives applauded the brand, and liberals revolted by boycotting the brand and by rioting in front of the store locations, including all over Manhattan, which is where I'm from. But what happened to the business? Within a matter of hours, the company broke one-day sales records. And by the next year, total sales were up 12%. The captain was steering the boat. However, when Papa John's, the fast food pizza delivery company, criticized the NFL, the National Football League, around the same time that players were taking a knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality. Again, conservatives applauded, liberals revolted. What happened to the business? By the next quarter, total sales were down 4%. The NFL and Papa John's mutually ended their partnership, and the CEO was forced to step down. The market forces overthrew the captain. So in this particular context, it's incredibly difficult, and consumers are really sensing this sort of pressure to take a stand on values, but all of this is complicated by the fact that because it's very hard to map the relationship between taking a stand on values and some sort of business outcome, executives are woefully unprepared for this scenario. Only 67% of global executives today say that their organization lives up to its stated values. and only 53% say that their approach to the customer experience demonstrates empathy for their customer. So talking about values feels like turmoil, oftentimes because we are quick to look at what's happening on the surface. But as your boat, as your company traverses these stormy, choppy waters, the only way you'll stay in control is if you understand and address the root cause. What are people really clamoring for and why? To answer this question, we turn to our Forrester data sets, which are comprised of hundreds of thousands of global consumer behavioral data, consumer attitudinal data. We also track business data, and all of this has been trended for the past 22 years. And we were following this analysis until we could get really deep into the issue, deep enough until we could see the order beneath the chaos, and we could measure the undercurrents that shape what people are doing and why. And when we get to this level, we find something that is very human, something that we all have in common, that's right here with us in the room, even though we rarely acknowledge it, something that's fundamental to almost every decision we make, even though it's typically, usually invisible to us. And this is something we've talked about, certainly implicitly, over the past 24 hours or so. At certain points it's been explicit, but I'd like to shine a spotlight on it right now, and this is the making of meaning. So our years of data analysis have shown to us that people are demanding values-driven companies because they're searching for meaning. And I don't mean this search for meaning to be some abstract spiritual quest. This is a very real, deep-seated, evolutionary force that powers just about every choice we make. Whether we realize it or not, we are always trying to maximize our moments of meaning. And we achieve these moments of meaning when any of 5 things happen. And conveniently, we can use the acronym MEANS to track and remember all 5. So we achieve this moment of meaning when we experience morality, engagement, awareness, network, and satisfaction. So values are integral to each one of these things, and brands that demonstrate their values and specifically demonstrate a commitment to these values help people make meaning. So let me show you what I mean by that. Morality. We typically experience meaning when we see our moral code reflected in the world around us and when we observe a rich emotional experience. Today, as we've been talking about at length so far at the conference, as our world becomes increasingly digital, consumers have a greater appetite for this emotional connection, this authentic human connection. It's why we're seeing robots come to life that have facial expressions that look human, that have some sort of personality. This is Curry, who was a robot that was launched a couple of years ago at the Consumer Electronics Show, who became famous for being the insanely cute robot. So we start using these human terms as well to describe our technologies. So as technology takes on more human tasks like working, like talking, now like thinking, consumers are looking to brands to stay ahead of the curve by showing that they care, that they have empathy. One of the things that computers are not doing today and perhaps never will. So Philips, for example, is a brand that shows that it's so much more than an electronics company when it brought together a group of individuals with lung disease and used Philips products to help them to sing again. And in a series of short films, Philips publishes this story of what's called the Breathless Choir, which features singers that struggle to overcome their illness and eventually develop the strength to perform a vocal musical piece on stage. So if you get that sort of warm, kind of that fuzzy feeling when you observe this, it's because you are observing this emotional human experience. You're seeing your own moral code reflected in this world. It's essentially like you're looking at moral beauty. The second is engagement. So we find meaning when we take action, when we do something, when we make something aligned to our values. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have run a marathon in the past? Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you have gone skydiving? Also quite a few. This is an adventurous group. So I have never run a marathon, but I have gone skydiving off of this mountain, which is the Jungfrau Mountain in Switzerland. But why do we do it, right? Why do we spend hours and hours of our lives going through the pain of running, a marathon? Or why do we risk our lives by jumping out of a plane? To some degree, yes, there's thrill, and there's novelty in that. But more than that, it's because we need to do something to feel this sense of validation, this sense of significance, this idea of meaning. So action is a very important piece here. One example of a brand that really brings this to light is called Greyston Bakery. So Greyston is a bakery that's located just north of New York City in what was the poorest district in the country at the time of the company's launch. And Greyston exists solely for the purpose of pulling people out of poverty, giving them the dignity of a job so they can filter back into the workforce. The bakery says that it doesn't hire people to bake brownies, it bakes brownies to hire people. So this action, right, this engagement is meaningful for the employees, but also for the consumers who know that when they're going to this particular establishment, they're not just buying baked goods, they are participating in a social mission. Awareness. We find meaning when something expands or deepens our awareness. Everlane is a really good example of this. The brand embraces what it calls radical transparency, and basically allows consumers to see where every product comes from, who is the creator behind that craftsmanship. That knowledge inherently makes the product and the purchase more valuable. Network. We sense meaning when we connect to a larger community, a larger whole, or a group that is dedicated to a specific purpose that we believe in, that we agree with. For instance, the British high street retailer Marks & Spencer's Spark Something Good program invites consumers and employees to come together, pick up a paintbrush or a shovel, and rebuild local parks and playgrounds. And what I love about this example is that the brand brings the consumers and the employees to engage side by side to create this sense of community around the company. And finally, satisfaction. We achieve this sense of meaning when something reinforces our satisfaction. 10 Tree Apparel has the goal to plant 1 billion trees by 2030. So for every product purchased, 10 trees are planted. And a consumer gets a unique code that they can register through the 10 Tree app to see where their trees are planted, and they can track the trees over time. So in this example, the experience doesn't end with the purchase, but with the satisfaction to know that your trees are flourishing. So at this point, you might be thinking, these are great, beautiful, feel-good stories, but in my company, in my industry, corporate social responsibility efforts are best left to the CSR department, the PR department, and they really have us covered. But let me say that our data proves that when meaning is central to the business strategy, it becomes a means to prosperity. Companies become a meaning maker when they know their values and own their values. Companies that state and continuously reinforce their values set themselves up for long-term success. 86% of these companies expect stronger customer relationships in the next 5 years, compared to only 73% of companies on average. About 8 in 10 expect to become the most innovative in their category, compared to only 64% of companies on average. And so knowing your values, owning your values, takes some hard self-reflection. And it's important to note that sometimes you have values buried deep in your company's origin story. Cadbury, for instance, is not a company that we typically think of as being values-driven, but the company was originally founded with the mission of improving the lives of factory workers and building affordable housing. So you likely have values tucked into pockets of your organization, and it's important to find them. And then create a values-oriented employee experience first and a customer experience second, because a values-oriented culture is crucial to employee engagement. We see in the data that 85% of employees who agree with their company values say they are very productive at work, compared to only 72% of employees on average. 87% of employees that agree with company values say they're likely to stay at their employer, compared to only 86 of those on average. And about 7 in 10 of these values-driven employees become advocates. They recommend their company's products and services, compared to just about half of employees on average. Warby Parker is a brand that we typically know to be one with a social mission, but Warby Parker really emphasizes its values internally far more than externally. The research showed that consumers buy Warby Parker eyeglasses, number 1 for style, number 2 for price, and number 3 for the social mission. But the social mission is the number 1 reason why employees come to work at Warby Parker every day. So internally, Warby Parker is very explicit, very overt about the social mission that it is adhering to, but it tends to sort of bury this content in the consumer-facing marketing collateral. And finally, it's important to use your values to convey what your brand means. You have to ask yourself, is this values-oriented experience, this story, this particular product, this service, whatever the experience may be in your context, is this reflecting the stakeholders' morality? Does it require engagement? Does it expand awareness? Does it create or cultivate a network? And does it reinforce satisfaction? Companies that become meaning makers for their stakeholders, the companies that enable people to execute on the values that they care about, set themselves up as well for longer-term success. 81% of these companies offer a top-tier customer experience, compared to just 65 on average, and these companies are more likely to report double-digit year-on-year revenue growth. So, this idea of cultivating meaning, of tapping into meaning making, is something that is really a fundamental kind of human evolutionary force, but it's one that is largely underserved today because of the fact that digital has failed to fully deliver on an immersive, emotional, engaging experience, because trust is shifting and is creating new communities, because revelations are leaving people feeling vulnerable. This is a moment in which brands can step in and help people achieve this sense of, or restore this sense of meaning. And when you do this, when you take a point of view on your values, look at the meaning that you're creating both for your customers and for your business. For your customers, meaning helps to guide our plans, our goals, right, our ambition. It determines how we invest our time and our money. For the business, creating meaning among your customers and employees helps to lock in retention and loyalty. So I want to just close with one point, which is a little bit broader, but I want to share it because I think it resonates with a lot of the content that we've shared already at the summit, which is that whenever we are talking about the state of technology in the world, we tend to have this assumption that things are always rising. Things keep going up and up and up and up. The level of empowerment of consumers is going up. The time that we spend on our technology, on our devices, is going up. The number of devices that we have, the amount of technology around us is going up. And this is certainly true on a macro level. We're seeing that people are increasingly connected. Our data shows that last year we hit a tipping point where over half of the world's population connected to the internet, and these numbers are growing as we speak. So this is certainly true, but there are certain other data points that are sort of hidden under this macro trend that executives need to become more sensitive to and more aware of, because they are either flatlining or they're going down, right? There are things that are not always going up. And one example of this is consumers' sense of value, the sense of feeling satisfied, feeling validated through their experiences. And I'll give one instance. I was in Singapore last week, which is why this one is top of mind, and it's a really interesting case. Singapore is essentially a powerhouse, innovative economy of Asia. So the company received over $7 billion of investment funding over the past 5 years, and then bolstered by this government-backed innovation fund, all of this propelled Singapore into the top 5 most innovative economies in the world. So there's an incredible momentum to create innovation, to fuel and accelerate this idea of digital transformation. And yet, 48% of consumers in Singapore say that it's rare to find a company that actually innovates, that truly innovates, and over half of younger consumers agree. So what this is showing is that you can double down on your technology efforts, double down on a digital transformation strategy, but you could still very well be missing the mark in terms of resonating with what the consumer needs and what the consumer is most responsive to. And so I think, again, that it's important for executives to become aware of and start to measure things like moods, emotions, risk sensitivities, because at the end of the day, these are the things that are driving consumers towards or away from your experiences, your technologies, and these are the things that deliver that sense of meaning or validation that consumers are truly after. Thank you.